Hello everyone. Today we are going to be talking about the hospitality sector. Now, if you look at the word hospitality, you will see that it has the word hospital in it. Now, we aren't talking about this kind of hospital. We are actually talking about this kind of hospital, a guest room. So the reason that the word hospitality comes from the word hospital is because in Latin, and as it's progressed over the years, the meaning of the word has always meant guest house. Okay, so first we have the word in late Latin, hospitalite, which means guest house or inn. Later on, hospitalis means of a guest or host, and then hospice also means guest or host. So this word transformed a little bit in French. Hospital or hospital meant hostel, shelter, lodging. And then in the 15th century English, it actually became known as a charitable institution to house and maintain the needy. So that's really where the word hospitality comes from. Today, hospitality has two different meanings. One meaning actually relates to service and types of service quality, and that is the idea that there is an act taking place to welcome a guest or a visitor and to make them feel welcome in your home or your place of business, whatever it may be. The second meaning of hospitality actually has to do with organizations that are providing services to guests or to paying customers, typically in the form of food and beverage or accommodation. So we often think of hospitality as being the provision of food and drink or accommodation for people away from home. And we talk about two different types of customers. One is, of course, our tourists and our travelers who are away from home and need to be able to obtain those essential services. But we also do have our residents, our locals who live there. If any of you work in a restaurant, a cafe, a bar, chances are a lot of your customers are actually locals who are choosing to eat and drink away from home. And so that's where hospitality is a big part of what we do today. Now, talking about accommodation, there are lots of different types of accommodation that we can provide people. I'm sure that many of you are thinking about hotels, motels, potentially hostels if you've been backpacking before. Of course, we have inns and B&Bs, and the sharing economy is also a big part of that. We don't think of Airbnb because it's typically a private host to a private guest. We don't often think about that, but that's a big part of the accommodation sector. We also have timeshares, campgrounds. Here in Australia is very important. And then there are other types of accommodation that sometimes we don't think of so much. So for instance, serviced apartments, where people may come and live in an apartment for several weeks or several months rather than leasing their own apartment. Retirement villages nowadays, obviously, they are providing accommodation to lots of older folks who are retired, and they're often looking for hospitality professionals that really know the business because, their guests, the people that live there, are expecting good customer service. Student housing as well, so dormitories or colleges that you might be living in. And then very often we don't really think so much about cruise ships, but cruise ships are essentially floating resorts. They have everything that a resort would have, what a resort would offer. They simply are floating from place to place. So as we said, the other big part of the hospitality sector is the food and beverage piece. Now, of course, when we're thinking about that food and beverage, chances are you're considering your restaurants and your bars, your cafes, quick service. So for instance, Macca's or Hungry Jack's, of course. But then we do have lots of other elements for the food and beverage sector. So for instance, we do have room service, which is offered in hotels. We have institutional service, which is, the food that's served in college dormitories or in prisons. Concession stands at stadiums. So when you go to watch the footy, there's obviously concessions that are selling beer and other food. And then, of course, we do have other types of food service as well. So, for instance, street foods in your markets, wineries, breweries. Now, obviously, they are there for production purposes, but they've now become big attractions. So, they fulfill the attraction sector, but then also the food and beverage sector. And then there are other elements as well. So, for instance, food tours, cooking classes, food and beverage festivals. These very much fall under the events sector within the industry, but because of the food and beverage element, they also are part of the hospitality sector as well.